Good evening, everybody from Islamabad. My name is Waqas Hassan, and I volunteer for APSIG and many other forums in the internet community. This is a particularly important session, we believe, because from the previous 2 days you have had in the experience of uh, learning about various aspects of internet governance on a much advanced topic, but everything technology actually somehow summarizes everything into monetization and becomes and everything becomes it has to make some economic sense. So in that perspective, we have designed this session in a way that we would like to first explain what digital economy is and what kind of challenges and opportunities are out there, which will be covered by Professor Jiro, and then a case study of digital economy in India and how it has flourished, and what kind of lessons can we learn out of it. Since we are short of time with 40 minutes and two very seasoned and experienced speakers out there, I'd just like to make sure that we have enough time for questions and answers, and for your interaction, because this is probably an area where all of you would be very much interested to know things, and to talk about it. Just to set the scene, I'd just like to share one thing with you before we move on to the first presentation, and this is a food for thought for you. Uh, in 2005, Microsoft was the only tech company in the list of top eight by market capitalization in the world. And now, in this year, 2020, there is only one non-tech company in the same list of top eight. So this is how digital economy and the data and these platforms has grown over the years in just one decade or so. So we will be setting that context. I'd first like to invite Professor Jiro uh, Kokuryo. He is the Vice President for International Collaboration at the Keio University, Japan. He's also a professor at the Faculty of Policy Management, where he served as dean previously. His research and teaching interests are focused on developing business and social models that maximize the benefits of information technologies to society. Uh, I had the pleasure of attending his lecture in person at the APSIG in Bangkok, and I was absolutely impressed by what his thoughts is. He has a very different take on this topic. So, looking forward to an interesting discussion and presentation from Professor Zero. Over to you, sir.
I
Hello, good
think Dr.
evening.
Rajat has joined Waqas.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Good. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Jiro Kokuryo, and I am a business major by training, but I have been keenly interested in the topic of internet and internet governance for a long time. So I hope you see my presentation. And today I'm very honored to be given the opportunity to talk about digital economy. But before going into a specific topic, I have been struggling, as many people are, in really trying to think about society and technology. We often tend to think of technology being the driver to change the society. But in many ways, we know things are not as easy. On many occasions, the social requirements, moves technology into directions that are unexpected. So in the business context, we talk about this as tension between technology-driven innovation versus market-driven innovation. And we somehow have to think about this in an integrated manner. Otherwise, I mean, I hate to bring this topic up, but if the technologists were more aware of privacy issues 30 years ago, things would not have been as messy as things are right now. So it's really a matter of trying to sort of do concurrent engineering of technology systems and social systems. So that's at a very high level, that's been the issue that I've been working on for many years. And the key is to coming up with some key concepts that integrate that are common between technological system and social system. And one of the things that such concepts that I focus on is the notion of constraints. Of course, technology changes society by removing many of the constraining factors, social constraining factors, and moves and drives the society ahead. At the same time, the social needs creates a new constraints in the system, which makes the focal point of technological development. So systems evolve to maximize the use of constraining resources. I mean, so this is a typical system approach, but I have been trying to apply that system kind of approach in the thought of techno-social systems. In particular, I have been focusing on traceability, which as such a constraining factor, as well as the key design factor that connects the technological system and the social system. Of course, we all know traceability, it's the word traceability have been around in the IT sector for the last 15 years or so, particularly in the context of supply chain, and particularly things like food safety in the supply chain. But increasingly, with the penetration of IoT and things like blockchain, the notion of traceability is expanding into traceability of people, traceability of money, or even traceability of knowledge, or in other words, traceability of influence that flow through the systems in the society. And of course, all these technology, IoT, cloud, 5G, and AI is really adding a new level of traceability in many things. Now, the reason why I focus on this traceability is that it comes from the recognition that the modern industrial systems really have been assuming lack of traceability. Now, when with the second industrial revolution, the human suddenly became capable of producing huge amounts of volume of product. But of course, in order to justify investment to such huge production system, we needed large market, like selling far away. So now we are shipping products to overseas with really no knowledge of who the eventual consumers are. So, but many of the marketing kinds of arrangement like branding, packaging, TV commercials, we realize are all systems that are designed to sell untraceable product to anonymous mass. And that has been the reason why ownership, the notion of ownership was very important, because you're shipping it to somebody else too far away, and you will never be able to see the product again. So in order to make that kind of thing happen, you have to have total control over the property and be able to exchange that for money or for with other goods. So we are really talking about exchange economy of product ownership. Now, that whole situation is rapidly changing, of course, with IoT, with blockchain, with many other technologies, network technology and sensor technology that really that adds capability to track things. So that's so logically we come to the conclusion that perhaps our economic system that are not based on the exchange of ownership, property ownership, may be possible. And in actuality, we are starting to observe the rise of sharing economy, or many kinds of AAS. I mean, platform as a service, software as a service, many kind of business models that which was traditionally done through exchange of ownership is now done through offering of accessibility to utility of whatever product that are produced. So my argument is that we are the advance in the information technology is really fundamentally changing the industrial economy that have been developing for the last 2 centuries. I am recently starting to call this a potluck economy, meaning that instead of exchanging ownership, everybody's putting whatever they have into the use of others. I mean, for like the major difference between rental car business and car share business is that car share business allows the end user, the consumer, to rent out their own property when they're not using the car, and so forth. And perhaps more significantly, we may want to apply this to the use of data. Of course, data belongs to the individual, but of course, data has utility to other people. So what we need are arrangements whereby data of individuals are offered for use, not transferred, but offered for use by a large number of other people. So if we could somehow make that kind of arrangements to share the utility of data, so that the collective benefit of data will be accomplished. So so this applies not only for physical good, but for software kinds of things also. And of course, the above has been the arguments I've been making even before COVID-19. Of course, in the context of COVID-19, we may want to think about how that may affect. But of course, this is a major addition of constraint in the system. So major redesign of techno-social systems is is to be anticipated. So some of the constraints I can think of are like the loss of context building mechanism, or minimization of contact points in physical handling, all kinds of things. So basically, my thesis is about systems evolving dynamically, rather than assuming some ultimate equilibrium economy. So, and I look forward to discussing these kinds of issues and the next agenda with the technology people. So let me stop here because I know the time is very limited.
Thank you, Professor Jiro. As always, very interesting take on what digital economy and traceability and the transfer against offering of data. We do have a question, but I think in the interest of time, it is better that we let Professor Rajat finish with his slides, and then we can have a good discussion among us. So. Thank you, Professor Rajat, for being here. We actually were almost hopeless that you would be able to join us because you kept popping in, popping out. But let me just introduce him formally. Dr. Rajat Kathuria is Director and Chief Executive at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, New Delhi. He has 20 years of experience in teaching and 15 years of experience in economic policy, universal access, regulations, and competition policy. So I'll just stop here and let Dr. Rajat take the floor. If you have any questions, please post it in the chat window so that we can take all the questions at the end. Professor, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Waqar. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Waqar. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Professor Kokuryo, for that wonderful presentation. There are many issues of interest to me as well in the presentation that you made, especially the impact of technology and market structure and how endogenous technology is to the creation of new markets, new paradigms, and the new sharing economy. So wonderful talk. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Govind, for inviting me. Since time is short, I will go straight into sort of the presentation that I've made. But let me also say that the presentation is simply sort of a manifestation of the enormous impacts that the digital economy can have in any country, not only just India, but especially emerging markets, and the huge impacts that is having. And I would try in this presentation to show you some of those impacts, the challenges, and what the response ought to be for countries like India, for emerging markets like India. So my first sort of idea here is to show that for countries like India that suffered from a lot of weaknesses in infrastructure, when mobile technology, especially mobile technology came into being, mobile telecom technology came into being, a lot of the deficiencies of existing infrastructure, not only telecom, but other connectivity infrastructure, was simply overcome by newfound access to mobiles and internets. I won't take you through the history, but in 1998, India's teledensity, that is number of phones per 100 people, was about 1% or thereabouts. And that's when India liberalized its telecommunications markets. And a lot of emerging markets, I think, liberalized at that time. And our overall teledensity was very, very low in 1994. And today, our overall teledensity is 90%. And there are some cities, and India, is a very heterogeneous country. There are some cities like Bombay and Delhi and Bangalore that enjoy more than 100% teledensity, which means that there are more phones than people in those cities, including infants and children who obviously don't have phones. So that means that a number of people have multiple phones. And India being a mobile-first economy means that a lot of access is because of mobile technology. A lot of first-time access is mobile technology. And a lot of first-time access to the internet is through the mobile. Unfortunately, that has some implications for the quality of internet and the quality of fixed line, because fixed line penetration has been fairly stagnant. And we know that the quality of the internet infrastructure can be much better on fixed line. So not at the expense of fixed line, but I think we have grown in mobile access, both in terms of internet and voice, and increasingly towards data using the mobile platform. And one of the shortcomings, as I said, weaknesses has been the sort of decline or stagnancy of the fixed line infrastructure. And there is a renewed push to ensure that fixed line broadband, which will ensure good quality infrastructure and access, gets its due promotion and support in terms of policy. The other sort of interesting fact that has happened in India is that the impacts, as I was just saying, that the impacts of access to technology on GDP, and Professor Kokuryo has talked about the new business models, and you can think about internet and access to mobile platforms as promoting GDP growth. And India being a country of subcontinental proportions, you could do this exercise because different states in India has several states, over 30 states, and these states have different levels of mobile and internet penetration. But however you cut the pie, however you slice the dice, you're going to get large impacts of telecommunications technology on the GDP of the state. So essentially what happens is a 10% increase in mobile penetration or a 10% increase in internet penetration gives you a big bang for the buck, which is about 2.5% to 3% of bounce in state level gross domestic product in India. And these are higher than the impacts that you see in developed economies. For instance, in Japan, you would see a very low impact. In United States, you would see a low impact. But in emerging markets, in developing markets, as I said, where you don't have access to other kinds of infrastructure, the technology platforms actually pick up the impacts of the lack of other infrastructure and give you impacts on GDP. This is not to say, and I'm not making the point that we should neglect other forms of infrastructure, but telecommunications infrastructure allows you quick connectivity. And by the time you're building other forms of connectivity, your logistics, your supply chains, your roads, your ports, and your other kinds of infrastructure, your connectivity through technology platforms like mobile and internet allow you to overcome those deficiencies, not completely, but at least to a small extent. And that's why in developing economies like India, you see these very large impacts of telecommunications technology. And I will show you some of the impacts that it's been having across sectors. As you know, one of the reasons why India has been so successful in internet and mobile and penetration, apart from the fact there's enormous competition in the market in India, in the telecommunications sector. The other reason is the technology has sort of progressed rapidly, and India is at the frontier. Every country today that is adopting sort of 4G or mobile technology going towards 5G is almost at the frontier. So this technology is at the frontier, plus there's a lot of competition, which has meant that the price of data and the price of voice in India is extremely low, which means that penetration has been extremely high. In PPP terms, India is not the lowest priced country, as you will see from this slide, but in market exchange rate terms, India is the lowest priced country for data. Data is incredibly cheap in India, especially since 2016, when we had this Jiro platform that came into India and provided very low data rates, and other service providers, other internet service providers were forced to follow that decline in tariff. And tariff has declined enormously since 2016, with the result that data usage in India has picked up really rapidly. So India has also, apart from very large data usage, it has also a good ecosystem around startups. And because of sort of net neutrality and because of easy access to telecommunications platforms and internet platforms, and the fact that we have a very entrepreneurial and skilled and technologically skilled population, both expatriate that comes back from the United States, comes back from Europe to live and work in India apart. And then there is also an indigenous technologically savvy population, with the result that startups in India have been extremely successful. I won't bore you with the details, but the startup ecosystem, especially technology startups and e-commerce startups in India, are doing fairly well. Some of them have graduated to become unicorns. Some of them have been bought up by bigger companies. And I know that as an aside, let me pause here as an aside and say that, you know, in Europe and United States, there is a big discussion around big tech, the power of big tech, the big companies that Waqar talked about that are listed in globally, that are now almost all tech companies. So some of those companies actually buy out startups. Now there's a big discussion that is happening in the rest of the world, including in perhaps in some emerging markets, is whether the buying up of these startups, buying up of these smaller companies, actually inhibits the market from playing itself out. Does it inhibit innovation? Does it constrain the functioning of markets? And does it allow these big tech companies to exercise monopoly or oligopolistic power? And I think that's an interesting discussion that we ought to have, and that is playing out today. But the other side of it is startups. Some of the startups would like to be bought, would like to, you know, create an idea and move on to another idea, while the existing companies that buy them out can promote the idea. Often what happens, the idea gets shelved because some of the big companies sometimes feel that that is a competitive threat to them. So, you know, there are both sort of on balance. One has to decide, and it's going to be an empirical question, whether big tech is pro-competition and pro-innovation, or whether they thwart innovation. But I think for students, this is an extremely important issue to think about. Technology has been a godsend for many countries, including in India. And I won't, as I said, I leave the slides with you. You can sort of look at them and look at many of the references around this in India, around digital inclusion. But at the foundation of digital inclusion of India has been this Aadhaar identity, biometric identity. So that provides a security and identity for cashless transactions that could happen, money directly going into bank accounts of people, so that social security payments, which have become so necessary during and after the pandemic. I'm not saying after the pandemic, of course, they will become necessary, but during the pandemic, it is absolutely essential that money for people that have lost livelihoods is given to their bank accounts. And this sort of Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trinity that we talk about in India, which is the bank account, the mobile phone, and the biometric identity, allows secure transactions of money from the government to individual bank accounts. And a lot of it has been happening, and it has been able to overcome a lot of leakages that used to happen in India as a part of this transaction. So those leakages have been plugged, which means that the government has been able to save money and enable digital inclusion. So I think technology, as I said, has been a godsend. And of course, you know, if you have this kind of technology, you have to have security, and the Aadhaar system is a secure system, although there have been some breaches in the past in this system. And this will be a sort of a cat and mouse game. There will be breaches, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Technology is there to serve a purpose. There will be abuse of technology. There will be abuse of the system. But I think we have to be, as sort of people that are trying to regulate the system, we have to find new ways and better ways to regulate and safeguard the system through collaborations, through partnerships, to trying to recruit the best people who can achieve this.
Dr. Rajat, you have roughly 2.5 to 3 minutes, and we have in the chat window as well. So
I thought of Waqar, I'll try and conclude now, which is to say that one of the things that the pandemic has done in India, apart from sort of demonetization that we had, some of you have probably heard about demonetization in India in 2016, where large currency notes were demonetized and phased out, which gave impetus to digital transactions. The pandemic has accelerated that, and so, as I said, technology has provided a means to make those cashless transactions. And some of this behavioral change that is happening in India, I think will become permanent, not only in India, but I think some of this change is going to become permanent, with the result that technology is going to, in the fintech space, in the cash system or the cashless system, technology is going to become very important and significant. There are challenges to the digital economy in India and elsewhere. And I think one of the big challenges that India faces is the quality of its broadband infrastructure. You can see this heterogeneity in these slides. The dark states have good quality infrastructure. The light states don't have good quality infrastructure in terms of speed, in terms of access to fixed line broadband, etc. and that needs to be sort of addressed, as we also need to address the security challenge. But I said the security challenge cannot be addressed by a single regulator. This will have to be done across several regulators. It will have to be done across society. People like you and me have to be also aware of the challenges, and we have to be also exercise caution, but we have to build partnerships for data security and breach. And I think the digital economy is also going to enable us to achieve what I think is going to be a low carbon green economy in the future. So all in all, I think for India and for the rest of the emerging world, technology has been a godsend because it's been able to overcome several deficits, not at the expense. But now we need to build our other forms of infrastructure, the educations, the skills, the startups, the ecosystem, the financing, the credit infrastructure, so that we can make the most use of this technology for a more sustainable and a more inclusive future for India and for the rest of the world. Thank you very much, Waqar. I hope I have not taken too much more time than I ought.
Thank you, Dr. Rajat. No, well, it was almost on time. Let's say a minute over, but we can work around that. So, without further ado, because there are a lot of discussion and questions in the chat window, which of course means that we had a very interesting content for all of our participants here. So, the first question I'll just quickly read out for Professor Jiro is: as far as exchange of ownership, a kind of robust infrastructure is required. For this purpose, a huge amount is needed to be invested into the digital economy. So it's a question: is there a huge amount that is requested that is required to be invested in the digital economy for this to happen?
Yes, and I anticipate that there will be huge competition for. Actually, I hate to use this word, but hegemony over things like building of IoT data platform. I mean, huge amount of data being generated from IoT devices. Now, on top of it, the more recent national security issues in securing supply chain transparency. So I think there will be international, national competition for platform hegemony over IoT. There will be intercompany competition on control of IoT generated data. So I anticipate there will be huge investment in the next 10 years over that kind of data, on top of already the cloud-based kinds of smartphone cloud based kind of systems too. So yes, it does require infrastructure, and yes, I think there will be huge competition around that.
Right. Thank you, Professor Jiro. So the next question, so by the way, this question was by Mr. Rakesh Mohan Bhatt, which Professor Jiro has just answered. So the next question is to Dr. Rajat by Mr. Ajay DM. Your views on telecom sector dominated by the private sector and the fall of public sector company like BSNL in India, effects and advantages of this private sector dominance in the future. So what are the effects and advantages of this?
I think the telecom sector in most countries is going to be led by the private sector. I think BSNL has served its purpose. I think BSNL needs to recast itself. It's not, public sector the world over is not very good at interfacing with consumers. It's not nimble. It doesn't make fast decisions. It's not very good with new technology. And I think what BSNL should do, or what the public sector ought to do, and this happened in United Kingdom, is the public sector should become the facilities provider, the pipes. It's good at, it has the right of way, it can build, it can dig, and it can build infrastructure, and then lease that out to private sector. So I think a recasting of BSNL, do less interface with consumers, do less interface with subscribers, because you're not good at that. Recast yourself and let the private sector sort of do what it does best, is interface with consumers. But of course, there is a risk of competition being sort of dominated by, or the lack of competition or emergence of oligopoly. And there we need, I think, strong regulators, and we need a strong competition law and strong competition policy to ensure that there is no abuse of dominance. But in telecom, in sectors like IoT, in sectors like platforms, necessarily, as I was alluding to in my talk earlier as well, it will be dominated because of network effects. You will get the domination of a few companies. You won't see a very large number of small players. You'll see a small number of very large players, and you have to address that through competition law and competition policy.
Yes, fairly pointed out, Dr. Rajat. I think that's a very good response. So next question is again for you, Dr. Rajat. This is by Dayanidhi Krishna. How do you see this health stack integrated with Arogya, Sanjeevani, Ayushman Bharat translate into digital healthcare economic consequences?
I think for, as I was saying in my talk as well, I think for a country like India, which has enormous deficits in providing health services to its citizens, because you can't have hospitals located in remote areas, and even in urban areas which are facing this sort of dearth of good quality healthcare infrastructure. I think digital health is going to, it won't sort of completely provide the solution, but I think it can be coexist with the existence of face-to-face healthcare. So I think digital health is going to be important for both in terms of diagnosis purposes, both in terms of what Professor Kokuryo was also talking about, tracing and contact tracing, etc. So all that is being used right now in India. To Nidhi, I would just say, I mean, technology is sort of addresses many of our public service deficits and health service deficits also. But I think we should be sanguine about the fact that it won't provide a complete solution. It will have to coexist with the traditional forms of service delivery as well, but it can, to an extent, overcome the big problem because of the population size that India has. But don't expect that technology will become a magic bullet which will solve all our problems. What the health stack is in there. Of course, there will be data privacy, etc., issues that need to be sorted out, and India's data privacy bill is still in the works. But technology is an enabler, but it won't be a complete solution, I think, for our public service deficits.
Right, sir. So I think we have 3 minutes left. So I'll just request the speakers to respond in 1 minute because we do have some more questions. This one is by Yuan for Professor Jiro. How about techno-social systems is appropriate to govern or supervise share economy in Europe? Is there some mature experiences that we can learn from?
Yeah. There's a very close relationship between the notion of sharing economy and potluck economy that I talked about. There is a slight difference, though, but because sharing economy has this notion of sharing ownership, and I don't assume that. I am assuming that ownership of private property will continue. But the utility of goods to be shared. But of course, the two concepts are very similar, and we need some arrangement, concepts that govern the new form of economy, because the traditional industrial disciplines alone is not sufficient for the governance of the digital economy in the future.
Right, sir. Dr. Rajat, the question is by Suhaib Bukhari. Do you think private internet intermediaries are slowly shifting towards advertisement business model, partially of the likes of social media companies, which means these will be more interested in more data acquisition and profiling of the data subjects, which is something to worry about? Your thoughts on this?
I think so. I think the data economy is still evolving, and a lot of people think that data is the new oil. A lot of activists and NGOs feel data is the new toxic. I think the reality is somewhere in between. Data can provide value, and as Professor Kokuryo said, data will create a lot of value. Data in my hands has no, my data in my hands has no value, but when it is in somebody else's hand, it obviously they're able to create value. But you have to safeguard privacy. You can't use especially my private data, my health data, my financial data. All that has to be de-identified. If you're going to use it for the public good, if you're going to use it for public benefit, then it has to be de-identified and then used for the public good. And that is, I think, going to be extremely important and challenging to do. Data has value, but you need to safeguard individual interests. And of course, there will be fly-by-night operators who will try and make a quick buck anywhere in the world as a result of this. But we have to safeguard against this.
Right. So we're almost at the top of the hour here, but being a good moderator, I'd like to take the last question that is left in the chat window, because Yik also raised the hand, but we couldn't give her the floor. So here's the question: as some of the big tech companies benefit immensely from digital economy, do you think it would be fair to impose a digital tax to create better digital infrastructure? Are we at the right juncture of time to do it for most countries? And with this question, I mean, both of you can have a take on this, and please also give your closing statement along with this. Thank you.
Can I comment?
Yeah, Professor Jiro, yes, please.
Yeah, as Dr. Rajat mentioned, that there is network effect, and the ownership. I mean, who does that network? The extra value created by the network effect should belong to is the question. I'm not sure if tax is implementable, but yes, I agree that the entire world community should share the benefit of that.
Very rightly said, sir. Dr. Rajat, please.
So I think this is a topic that is being discussed ever since, I think, at least 2014 in the G20 presidency of Australia. They started discussing this, and OECD is working on the aspects of digital tax. And it is a sort of I wouldn't say controversial, but it has several views, as Professor Kokuryo has also pointed out. I mean, where are the benefits? In India, we have imposed an equalization levy on these companies to start with. But the idea is, it is difficult to say, in the absence of a permanent establishment, where is the benefit coming from? And if once you're able to establish if the companies are deriving benefits from, let's say, India or Australia or Japan, then they should pay taxes there. But it's difficult to identify the amounts, and because there's so much of pass-through that happens in these transactions. So this is something that the world is discussing. The OECD has produced papers and reams of reports on this, but I don't think we've heard the last word on digital taxation, and it will remain as an agenda on the table for the international community to discuss and negotiate on.
Right, sir. So we've already closed by a few minutes, but I think this was a very good discussion that we had. So I thank you, Professor Jiro and Dr. Rajat, for being such great panelists and for sticking to the time that you had, and to the participants for their interaction. I mean, the discussion that we had and the questions were, I think, truly insightful. So it's been a great honor. Thank you, everybody, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Waqas.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.